where every paw is family and every heartbeat matters. Welcome to Nobleness Veterinary, your pet's noble home for healing. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of fresh flowers that someone had left on beside the bed. A soft beep filled the silence of the hospital room, rhythmic and steady. To most, it would be a reassuring sound, a sign that life was still here. But for me, it was a constant reminder of how fragile everything had become. I sat in the chair beside the bed, the one with the uncomfortable padding, the kind that never truly allows you to relax. My hands folded tightly in my lap, and my eyes flicked between the monitors and the bed where John lay. He hadn't moved in what felt like days, a week maybe. I had lost track of time. His face, once full of life and humor, was now pale and drawn, with shadows beneath his eyes. But it wasn't his face that caught my attention. It was the dog who refused to leave his side. It had been a rainy afternoon when I found him, scruffy, soaked to the bone, shivering under the old oak tree at the edge of the park. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves, as if nature itself had decided to mourn. I'd been walking to the bus stop when I saw him, sitting in the cold, his eyes a mix of confusion and loneliness. I hesitated. Something the way he looked at me made me pause. Like he was waiting for permission to trust, unsure whether the world still had kindness in it. I approached slowly, my umbrella dripped with the rain, and crouched in front of him. His fur was matted, his body thin. And yet, there was something gentle about him, something that told me he wasn't just a lost animal, but a creature with a story to tell. And then I saw it. Tied gently around his neck was a faded red scarf, its edges frayed with time. I couldn't explain it, but it seemed important, like it had been placed there by someone who cared. I didn't ask myself why I felt compelled to take him in. Maybe it was the softness in his eyes, or perhaps it was the aching emptiness in my own heart. I didn't know it then, but this small, abandoned dog would become the thread that stitched my life back together. The dog, whom I had named Charlie, stayed close from the moment we met. He followed me everywhere, his tail wagging even in the rain. But it wasn't until I brought him to the hospital that I began to understand the true depth of his presence. John had always loved animals. In our earlier years together, we had 2 cats, a bird, and even a rabbit at one point. He was the kind of person who would stop to pet a dog on the street or leave extra food out for the stray cats near our building. So when I brought Charlie into his room, I could see the familiar softness in his eyes, something John would have done without hesitation. Charlie didn't hesitate either. As soon as I opened the door, he trotted right over to the bed, sniffing John's hand, then lying down beside him as if he had been there all along. That first night, I watched as Charlie nestled his head against John's side, his body a quiet, steady warmth against the coldness of the hospital room. And for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The beeping of the machines didn't seem as loud. The sterile, cold air of the hospital felt a little softer. Days passed, and Charlie became a regular presence in the hospital room. He never left John's side. I would sit in the chair beside the bed, my thoughts tangled in the quiet rhythm of the beeping machines. But Charlie would stare at me with those eyes filled with something I couldn't name. One morning, as I sat in the chair, trying to convince myself that I had the strength to face the day, Charlie nudged my leg gently. I looked down at him, his eyes searching mine. I sighed, wiping away the tears I hadn't realized I had shed. It was then that I realized something. Charlie wasn't just keeping John company. He was keeping me company too. He had a way of looking at me, as though he understood my sadness, my guilt, and the weight of grief that pressed down on me every single day. It was on the 5th day, when the hospital staff were beginning to prepare me for the worst, that something unexpected happened. John's vital signs had been flatlining for hours. The doctors had given their quiet warnings, and I had finally begun to come to terms with the fact that we were nearing the end. But I hadn't counted on Charlie. At that moment, Charlie let out a soft whine. He shifted on the bed, his eyes fixed on John's face. There was a subtle shift in the room, a stillness that seemed to pull me closer, as if the whole world was holding its breath. And then, the beeping stopped. For a long moment, I thought my heart had ceased to beat along with the machines. But as the silence lingered, I noticed something I had never seen before. Charlie, who had been so still beside the bed, stood up slowly, moving to John's side. He leaned in close, pressing his nose gently against John's hand, as though asking him to hold on. There was a tenderness in that gesture, an unspoken plea for a second chance. It was then that I realized what I had been missing all this time. Grief, yes, but hope too. Hope that something or someone could still find us, could still heal us if we let it. The days that followed were a blur. Time seemed to stretch, pulling me through a haze of uncertainty. I spent every moment at John's bedside, watching the gradual changes in his condition, while Charlie remained loyal as ever, never straying far from his side. It was one evening, just as the golden light of dusk filtered through the hospital windows, that I found something. I had been sorting through Charlie's things, a leash and a tattered ball, when something caught my eye. Buried beneath his fur, tucked into the folds of his collar, was a small, folded piece of paper. I carefully unfolded it, heart pounding with anticipation. It was a note, handwritten in faded ink. The words were simple, but they cut deep. Please take care of him. He's been through so much. He deserves a second chance. There was no signature, no name, just a deep sense of sorrow in those words. I felt a knot form in my throat. I didn't know what had happened to Charlie's previous owner, whether they had abandoned him or if life had forced them apart. But in that moment, I understood. This dog had known loss. He had known heartbreak. But despite it all, he had never given up. He had waited. And now he had come to find me. As the days went on, Charlie's presence began to affect more than just John and me. The nurses, who had initially been skeptical about having an animal in the ICU, found themselves softening in the dog's quiet, reassuring company. Patients, too, responded in ways I had never expected. One afternoon, a young boy in the bed across from John caught sight of Charlie. He had been silent for days, his body still from a trauma that had left him shaken and withdrawn. But when Charlie approached his bed, the boy's eyes flickered with something. A spark. Charlie, as if sensing the need, gently laid his head on the edge of the boy's bed, and then the softest whisper came from the boy's lips. Dog. It was the first word he had spoken in over a week. The nurse, who had been at his side, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But for me, it wasn't just the word that moved me. It was the way Charlie looked up at the boy, as if he understood the significance of that moment. There was something healing about the presence of this dog. Not just for me, not just for John, but for everyone who had the honor of being near him. It was later that week when I was able to track down more about Charlie's past. The hospital staff had been kind enough to ask around. One of the nurses knew a local shelter that had been contacted years ago about a stray dog who had been abandoned near a park. They had never learned much about the dog's past, but they knew one thing for sure: he had been left alone with nothing but a note and a red scarf. I stared at the scarf then, in my hands, the same one that had been around Charlie's neck since the first day I found him. It was worn and faded, but it carried with it a deep sense of history. I held it up to my face, inhaling the faint remnants of its owner's scent, whatever that had once been. It hit me all at once. Charlie had come to me not just as an animal in need, but as a soul who needed healing as much as I did. He had been abandoned, yes, but now he was finding his way back, just like me. The day came when I knew John was finally slipping away. The beeping machines were growing more erratic, the rhythm less predictable. The room was quiet, except for the steady sound of Charlie breathing, his head resting against John's side. As I sat there, holding John's hand, I realized how much had changed since that rainy afternoon when I found Charlie. He had brought life back to our world, even in the face of death. I looked down at Charlie, who gazed up at me with those soulful eyes, and I whispered, "Thank you." There was no need for anything more. The beeping machines had quieted now, but Charlie's presence remained. Charlie became my quiet companion for the days and months that followed. It wasn't just the dog that had healed me. It was the bond we had formed, the way our souls intertwined and found comfort in one another's presence. The truth was, I hadn't just saved Charlie, he had saved me. And now, looking out at the park where we first met, I understood. There was no finality, no closure in grief, only the slow, steady process of healing, and in that there was hope, The world was quieter now, but it wasn't empty. There was love in the small, silent moments. The way Charlie's tail wagged when I came home, the way he looked at me as if to say, "You're not alone." And so, as I sit here with Charlie by my side, I urge you to remember that there are always second chances. For us, for them, for everyone. Animals, like people, deserve kindness and a fresh start. If you're ever in a position to save a life, whether it's a dog, a cat, or anyone in need, remember that their story isn't over yet. It could just be the beginning of something beautiful. Please consider supporting animal rescue organizations, share their stories, and believe in the kindness that exists in the world. Sometimes the smallest act can create the greatest transformation.